Come to the ballpark in 2022 and almost every stadium is going to put on a show. Milwaukee has a sausage race, Washington a president's race, and the Yankees grounds crew does the YMCA. But back in the old days of baseball, the game was more formal and buttoned up. Fans wore suits to the games, and shenanigans were kept to a minimum, except by one owner. Over his 40 years in baseball, Bill Veeck always kept things interesting at the ballpark. He signed a 3'7" man to take an MLB at-bat, had a professional clown as his first base coach, and let the fans manage the game from the stands. Throughout his ownership stints with 3 major league teams, Veeck proved that he was truly the craziest owner in sports history. Born on February 9, 1914, Bill Veeck grew up in the shadow of Wrigley Field. His father was an executive in the Cubs organization. By the time he was 11, Bill was working as a vendor, ticket seller, and junior groundskeeper for the Cubs. When his father died in 1933, Beck left college to work for the club. It was there where he had the idea to plant ivy within the brick walls of the outfield, an iconic element of the stadium that remains to this day. Veeck then bought the Milwaukee Brewers, then a minor league team, where he would turn attendance numbers around with endless stunts, giving away chickens and goats to fans before games, and playing games in the early mornings to accommodate war supply line workers who had shifts deep into the night. Veeck then volunteered for World War II, where he spent 2 years in the Marines. In the Pacific Theater, Veeck's right leg was crushed by the recoil of an anti-aircraft gun. Over his 22 months in the service, 18 were spent in military hospitals. The leg was amputated in 1946, and Veeck would need over 20 operations over the course of his life to sustain his energetic lifestyle. Veeck was zestful, always on his feet, smoking 6 packs of cigarettes a day and endlessly traveling to churches and town halls promoting his team's ball games, always with a stack of tickets in hand. In 1947, Veeck bought his first major league team, the Cleveland Indians. Midway through his first season as owner, Veeck signed Negro leaguer Larry Doby, making him the second player to integrate baseball after Jackie Robinson, and the first player to do so in the American League. Like Robinson, Doby endured taunts from fans, opponents, and teammates, and unlike Robinson, he would spend a majority of his first season on the bench. Veeck was highly criticized by the press for the move, but it did an incredible amount for integration. Robinson was no longer an experiment. Signing black players was now a trend, and for other teams, the results on the field spoke for themselves. In Cleveland, Veeck's antics continued and fans loved them. He hired a professional performer, Max Padkin, a former pitcher who was double-jointed, to coach first base. In the course of his long career, Padkin would tirelessly entertain fans with gestures making fun of the other team and the umpire. The team would let Padkin go when he brought his pet snakes on a train, horrifying nearby passengers. In 1948, in the middle of a heated pennant race between the Yankees, Red Sox, and his own Cleveland Indians, Veeck signed Negro League legend Satchel Paige. Satchel Paige could have been one of the most famous major league pitchers of all time. With a repertoire of pitches and a biting fastball, his talent was undeniable. But instead of large stadiums in New York and Boston, Paige would travel with other Negro League stars to small ballparks on packed, sweaty buses. At this point in his career, Satchel had played in Chattanooga, Birmingham, Cuba, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, and Baltimore. Now, after over 20 years of professional baseball, on his 42nd birthday, Paige signed his first major league contract. He was the first black pitcher in American League history. Satchel had lost the biting fastball, but with a set of curves and herky-jerk motions, the 42-year-old kept the American League hitters guessing. "I never threw an illegal pitch," Paige said. "The trouble is, once in a while, I toss one that ain't ever been seen by this generation." In 1948, Paige had a 2.48 ERA. In his first start in Chicago, a record 50,000 fans came to see the aging star. Sometimes he'd come out of the bullpen, and Veeck built him his own rocking chair to relax during the games. Paige, along with Doby, who is now starting, third baseman Ken Keltner, and a young fireball pitcher named Bob Feller, helped lead the Indians to the 1948 World Series, where they would win in 6 games. Veeck's unorthodox ownership style had led Cleveland to a championship. With talented stars combined with Veeck's innovative promotions, the 48 Indians drew 2.6 million fans, then a record for most in a season. Veeck had learned how to attract fans with a winning team, but soon he would own a club with very different circumstances.
You know, I don't think that baseball is such a grim, serious thing. Sure, I don't want to interfere with the game, but I do want everyone who comes out the ballpark to have fun. And look, let's face it, often the ball game is not the most exciting thing that ever happened.
In 1951, Veeck bought the St. Louis Browns. The Browns played in Sportsman Park and were often overshadowed by the team they shared it with, the St. Louis Cardinals. Attendance for the Browns was abysmal, and Veeck tried to change that with his trademarked ingenuity. On Sunday, August 19, 1951, the Browns held the 50th anniversary celebration for the American League. Veck presented a cake on the field, and out of the cake popped Eddie Gaedel, a 3'7", 60-pound 26-year-old. The previous Friday, Veck had slipped a letter to the league office informing them he was signing a player. This was routine, but knowing it was a Friday afternoon, Veck knew no one at the office would check. At the start of the second game, Gaedel, with a jersey numbered 1/8, became a pinch hitter. The umpire stopped the game and questioned if it was legal. Veck presented Gaedel's one-day contract from his pocket. The umpire let Gaedel bat. Eddie Gaedel took 4 pitches from Detroit's pitcher Bob Kane. All 4 pitches were high, and he walked to first base. On his way, he tipped his hat to the crowd and was replaced with a pinch runner. "I felt like Babe Ruth out there," said Gaedel. 5 days later, Veck had another idea. Instead of buying tickets, fans for the Browns game on August 24th, 1951 bought grandstand manager cards. In the first inning, the Browns starter Ned Garver gave up 3 runs. Fans were then asked to vote on whether he should be taken out of the game. They voted no, and the Browns would win 5-3. The Athletics manager decried this promotion as making baseball a farce. "Never has a game been called better," said Veck. Despite his wild promotions, Veck's lowly Browns were always competing with the Cardinals for attendance. But legally, Veck had more control of Sportsman's Park than the Cardinals management. He therefore painted the entire stadium brown. Whenever the Cardinals would drop a player, Veck's Browns would pick them up, and he covered all the Cardinals posters in the stadium with posters of the Browns. All this was happening when the Cardinals were averaging 800,000 more fans than the Browns. Through his antics, Veck had made many enemies amongst the owners over the years. When he tried to move the Browns to Baltimore in 1954, Major League Baseball approved the deal, on the condition that Veck could not come with the team to Baltimore. Thus, Veck was ownerless again, but he would soon find another team to own, not too far from his first home. In 1959, Veck bought the Chicago White Sox. In his first season as owner, they made the World Series for the first time in 40 years. In 1960, he put names on the back of the White Sox road jerseys, the first team to ever do so. But due to his ailing health, Veck sold the White Sox in 1961. Baseball in those days had a system called the reserve clause. Players were signed when they were drafted and did not change teams for their entire career, unless traded. St. Louis outfielder Curt Flood tried to challenge this policy in court when he was traded from St. Louis to Philadelphia, a city he considered racist. The case remained hung up in appeals for years and derailed Flood's promising career. At the trial, no active players would testify on Flood's behalf, only figures who were out of baseball: Jackie Robinson, Hank Greenberg, and Bill Veck. At the trial, Veck said, at least once in his career, a player should be able to determine his own future and not be held in perpetuity. In 1975, the White Sox were in trouble. Attendance was down and it appeared nobody wanted to buy the ailing team, except for Veck. Now back from his health scare, he bought the White Sox and began his final chapter in the owner's chair. This time, he wouldn't hold anything back. Baseball is meant to be played in pants. Talk to any little leaguer who slid in shorts and it's obvious why. For 100 years, all major league teams had worn pants, until in 1976, Veck thought it'd be fun for his White Sox to put on shorts for a doubleheader. For America's bicentennial, Veck put on a celebratory parade in front of home plate, where he cast himself as a peg-legged pirate who played the flute. He also installed a shower in the centerfield stands during his time with the White Sox. Veck also had the idea that his White Sox announcer, Harry Carey, an often drunk, enthusiastic broadcaster, should sing "Take Me Out to the Ballgame" to the crowd during the 7th inning stretch. In 1978, Veck fired his manager mid-season and hired his replacement, Larry Doby. The second black man to play professional baseball, now became the second black manager. Doby was also fired at the end of the 1978 season, and in 1979, Veck would hire a 32-year-old manager named Tony La Russa. In 1979, Veck had his worst idea.
50,000 people, the largest crowd of the season, showed up at Chicago's Comiskey Park for the twilight doubleheader between the White Sox and the Detroit Tigers. 15,000 others had to be turned away. Many had come for Disco Demolition Night, a promotional gimmick. Between games, as planned, a huge box containing thousands of disco records was blown up. The rest was unplanned. Fans stormed out onto the field in the thousands. Disco records were hurled like frisbees. Bonfires were set. Bottles were thrown. The batting cage was torn down and destroyed. Fistfights broke out. White Sox players had to be locked in their clubhouse for their own protection. The melee lasted an hour and a half and resulted in 39 arrests and a few minor injuries.
The umpire-in-chief and the president of the league has declared that the playing conditions on the field are not will not permit them to play the second ball game.
Curt Flood lost his case in the U.S. Supreme Court, but Marvin Miller and the Players Organization would win the war. Free agency was here, and Veck did not have the cash to compete with other clubs. In 1980, he sold the club to Jerry Reinsdorf, a real estate mogul, thus ending Veck's last ownership tenure with a major league club. Satchel Paige became the first Negro League player elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1971. Veck was in the crowd that day to celebrate. Larry Doby made it too, and Cleveland built him a statue outside their stadium in 2015. In 1961, Eddie Goodell's body was found dead outside a bar. He had been beaten by a gang. Pitcher Bob Kane, the one who walked him on 4 pitches, came to his funeral. Harry Carey was fired from the White Sox broadcast booth and found a home in the Cubs booth at Wrigley Field, where his tradition of singing the 7th inning stretch would continue. Jerry Reinsdorf's ownership group would buy the Chicago Bulls in 1986 and made Jerry Krause, a scout under Veck, general manager. Krause would build and dismantle the greatest team in NBA history, Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls, who brought 6 championships to the city of Chicago. The White Sox won their first championship since 1919 and 2005. Reinsdorf sent Veck's family World Series rings. Cleveland hasn't won the World Series since Veck owned them in 1948, losing 7-game series in 1997 and 2016, where the Cubs would break their 108-year drought. As of writing, Tony La Russa is back managing the Chicago White Sox, 43 years after he first took the job from Beck. In his retirement, Veck found solace in going to games at the stadium he started his career at, Wrigley Field. Above the ivy that he planted, Veck would watch the games and take in the sun, always amongst the fans. Steve Jobs said, "Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs and square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward." Veck pushed baseball forward. With names on uniforms, integration, free agency, and endless promotional stunts in modern baseball, his imprint on the national pastime is obvious.
3 strikes, you're out with that.